The first thing we did was basically create this split roof, and in that way I wanted to reduce the footprint and the scale of the new structure. And when it came to kind of figuring out what we put on the roof, it was really a very, very simple decision, because we wanted to use Sinhala Ulu with the idea that it had this deep relevance to our culture and Sri Lankan, vernacular, the Sri Lankan vernacular really. And so we always knew it kind of would have a place in that setting. And then when it came to considering, what would hold up this structure, considering that it was a coconut grove and you have all of these, like lanky, swaying coconut trees all lined up, there was a certain rhythm to it, and I didn't want to interrupt that. So we immediately decided that we were going to do something really organic, and so we used actual tree trunks as the pillars in order to, keep that sightline undisturbed. Instead of fighting with the elements, which you're not going to win in these kind of locations, we started to really lean in hard to the idea that patina and the elements would start to affect the design. And so right off the bat, we decided to incorporate elements like that and really lean into it. So for example, you see a lot of rusted metal as a design element throughout Smoke and Bitters. As Smoke and Bitters transitions from sunset to nighttime, the lighting really comes into play to highlight the natural shapes and textures within that ecosystem and kind of bring in all of that detail back into a darkening environment. The textures of the tree trunks, there's like bumpy walls, the rusted metal sign all glowing in the night is kind of like the beacons in this narrative, and starts to kind of drive home in this new darkened environment the same narrative that we've been pushing in the daytime. Almost the entire project with Smoke and Bitters was sourced within a 6-kilometer radius of the location. And with that in mind, we wanted to incorporate elements that we could find within that location. And so we knew straight away that terracotta was something that we wanted to work with. And it also had, deep roots in that community. And so I kind of used it, I embedded it in the bar, it was embedded in the walls, and then I created a series of pendant lights in terracotta that kind of glowed above the bar. The story with these lights is quite interesting, because serendipitously the client found these like terracotta pahan makers in the village, and they'd only ever made one kind of terracotta vessel. And so we said, we couldn't find at the time, this was 6 or 7 years ago, we couldn't really find at the time terracotta options in the retail market. And so we were like, okay, cool, we're gonna have a crack at making our own. So we went and spoke to these guys. They graciously agreed to try out making something brand new. They'd never experimented in this way before. They've just for generations been making the same thing. And we drew it out on bristle board, how Lankan is that, and gave it to them, and basically within a few days they had created something brand new, and we were in their home, and we were sharing in that joy of this new production. And every time I go to Smoke and Bitters, I mean, yes, it's not perfect, right? And it's aged, with some grace, but it's chipped, and it's perfectly imperfectly beautiful. And it really speaks to that laid-back vibe that Smoke and Bitters, embodies so well. And every time I go back there, I'll look at these lamps, and I'm thinking, those villagers so graciously accepted the challenge, and now they literally have a hand in, what has become a bit of a legacy for Smoke and Bitters. In order to honor the initial brief and the client's intention, I wanted to give voice to the two most important elements of this business, obviously being the smoke and the bitters. And the bar is kind of the heart of the space, and you walk up, you are met with this bar, and it's very simple. It's just a monolithic slab of cement, and it was intentionally designed that way because the actual bar setup inside the bar and the back bar is kind of what we wanted to highlight, and it's really just a super humble tribute to the passion, the processes, the skill, and the ingenuity that goes on at Smoke and Bitters, because they make all of their bitters, liqueurs, and cocktails all in-house. And I think with the design, it was just really wanting to highlight that passion and bring that to the forefront. And with the smoker, they were able to create a smoker for the first time in Sri Lanka. It was with a metal worker down the road, and again create something, involve the community and create something new for the first time. And it's so well loved that we had to, it's called Guinea Raja, and we had to give it its own house. And so what would normally be reserved for like a Kalakusia situation at the back, we wanted to bring that to the forefront. It sits loud and proud in the heart of Smoke and Bitters, right in the middle of the restaurant. And even the wood that is used to fire the smoker, I wanted to incorporate that into the design. With the other architectural elements at Smoke and Bitters, even the walls, I wanted it to feel bumpy and textured and more akin to rock than plaster, and any kind of walls that protruded out into nature. We only really have one, but at the same time, even that, I didn't want it to seem out of place. So I wanted to kind of filigree the wall almost with traditional breeze blocks. And serendipitously again, the client was able to source an actual antique breeze block mold in timber, and then we were able to convince the owner to sell it to us, and we resurrected this design that was long dead, and we created it in cement. So that's another little unique piece in Smoke and Bitters. And then when it came to the furniture, again, 99% of the furniture at Smoke and Bitters was secondhand, and everything was reclaimed. Like I said, I wanted everything to have a patina and to really contribute to the story, that it belonged there, it was always there, and it wasn't this, modern affliction on this very, in this very natural space. The one thing we did make though were these dining tables, and this also has a story very linked to the Bauer Foundation. On one of my trips with my friend over there, we discovered for the first time the collaboration between Ina De Silva and Jeffrey Bauer. It was a dining table with a tulip stem, and it had Ina's distinctive sunburst pattern on it. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, I have got to try a version of that for myself. And so when it came to this project, it was a perfect opportunity to do so. And in fact, another one of our lifelong friends was a batik artisan, and so we collaborated on this piece together and multiple other pieces. But yeah, that's another way that you can inject personality and soul into a space, and this has kind of become a little iconic with the S&B design aesthetic. The next project I'm going to talk to you about is Ra. Ra is basically a love letter to Sri Lanka. The whole intention behind it is to focus on the life force that is the coconut tree and how it applies to us as Sri Lankans. And it's a celebration, and basically the intention behind it, the business was to highlight the centuries-old craft of toddy tapping, and then also focus on what makes us uniquely Sri Lankan, which is our culture and our food. This location is also right by the water, and so the elements had to be considered very heavily once again. And we decided to build everything around the very thing that thrives in this ecosystem, which is the humble coconut tree. It's also quite a challenging space. As you can see, there's a private road right in the middle of the restaurant, which divides it in half. And in addition to that, because of obviously coast conservation requirements, we couldn't do anything permanent in this space. So interestingly enough, the structures that you do see, the roof is suspended from the trees, so there's absolutely no foundation or anything holding it up. And then the actual trees here are the pillars that hold up the roof, and it's just as natural and not evasive as possible. Upon entering Ra, you're greeted with a handmade sign. And now this handmade sign kind of says it all, because it highlights the elements of the art of toddy tapping. So if you'll notice, you'll see the curved blade that cuts the coconut flower, you'll see the clay pot that collects the sap, you'll see the rope that connects the trees, and the coconut leaf also acts as a little double meaning here, where it has the leaf, but it also has little bits at the end where it's like a flame to also represent the cooking and the flame side of the business. The stamp icon and how it's set really then further cements its position in our culture. Once you enter Ra, you will be greeted with the bar, and the bar is basically drenched in mud from the side itself. Everything to do with the bar is made out of the coconut. So for example, the roof is made out of coconut leaves, thatched roofs. We have, like I said, the coconut pillars are actually what holds up the bar. The towering bounty is above the bar. The bar is studded with coconut shells, and so you could be really leaned in hard here. But it kind of tells the story in a very tactile way without you having to convey too much, and I think that's also a sign of a successful design. Once the customers start interacting with the bar, it reveals itself more and more, and then you can start to see the artistry that's gone into it. This bar is another story. So basically, long story short, we had to source 6,000 coconut shells, out of which we chose 2,000, out of which we had to then fabricate a new machine to cut it to the size and shape that I wanted, because generic machines were not doing it. And furthermore, we had like 3 hospital visits due to flying shards going into people's eyes and like quite serious accidents. And in the end, it was a real kind of process of obstacles to get it made. And to this day, it's probably one of my favorite things we've ever created, but also it's still being added to. So every year it gets larger and it's growing, and we're about to do a whole other piece and add to it. So yeah, it's something that's very much a work in progress. When it comes to the furniture at Ra, you guessed it, it's made from coconut wood. This wood has an extremely beautiful patination, and also the added benefit, of course, being, working really well with the coastal elements. I think for me, materials are not just a base when it comes to a project. It's really like the beginning of the story. I think the energy of a space is often comes down to the authenticity of its materials. And natural materials have a way, they have a certain integrity, like a natural vibration that's timeless. And when you start to incorporate these elements, it brings not only harmony, but it brings like a sense of presence and beauty into our built environments. I think weaving narratives through design elements is one approach, but sometimes it's more important to design around a guest experience. And so with Ra being all about showcasing our culture, I wanted to create an open kitchen where guests would be able to then interact with our deep traditions and roots and how we cook our food. And so with this open kitchen, guests can observe how we cook, they can smell what's on the fire, they can look at our techniques, and it's a much more engaging glimpse into our traditions than just looking at the menu and ordering a bit of papadam. By bringing basically the miris gala to the front of the counter, by allowing them to watch the cooks stoke the fire and build the curry, all of these things can also be turned into a teaching moment. And I often find that this kind of experiential aspect of people engaging with our country and our culture should be incorporated more into our hospitality. And even though the traditions hark back and look backwards, I think the presentation at Ra is quite modern, and that's like quite a winning combination for them. So I think there is room to respect our culture, but then also modernize and have innovation within that. The second most important element at Ra was most definitely the clay pot. The clay pot is an integral part of both the toddy tapping process and our cooking processes. And so I knew I wanted to weave that in throughout the property. The deck you see here was created on the other side of the road, and it has these tiers so that I felt, because we're overlooking the water, and I wanted the guests all to feel like they had been considered when it comes to the view, and not just for a bunch of people to have the best view. And so we tiered this up, and we had to use timber because of course we didn't want any permanent structures. And this was an opportunity for me to kind of pay a tribute to this mighty little vessel. And so I decided to adorn the ceiling with clay pots, and as it transitions from day to night, it starts to illuminate in this soft glow, which is another way to kind of reinforce the narrative that I've constructed throughout the space. Okay. The next project I want to talk about is number 8 Lane Barn Street. This was an unbelievable opportunity. This space was basically a lawyer's office. It's 436 square foot, so pretty tiny. And it sits in the vibrant court square of the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Gulf Fort. And this place has an epic history of its own. It's been around for more than 430 years. I'm sure it's seen and heard a lot. And as you can imagine, it was an absolute dream for me to be able to work on a project like this. And still, I think it's probably the biggest transformation that I've been able to achieve through my work. The client's own history with the space is quite interesting as well. He had to wait 18 years to get his hands on this property. So it belonged to his grandmother, who had left it for him, and it was still being occupied by the lawyers that used to work in it before. And I remember him telling me a story about how he used to come to Sri Lanka all the time and take like a Mari biscuit packet and go and sit with her and try to convince this lawyer that maybe she should give the space back to him because it was his. But this went on for 18 years, and finally he got his hands on the space. And by the time he spoke to me, he had obviously already completely thought about what he wanted to do with the space. And so when we had our conversation, it was quite alarming that he wanted a lot out of the space. So you imagine 430 square foot, and so he wanted an outdoor space, a living room, a kitchen, a bedroom with an ensuite bathroom, and a wardrobe. Okay, and this was like probably 10 by 20 feet, let's say, with a low roof when we walked in, right? And so enter Zoa Architects, who are absolutely fabulous, and they were really able to walk in and see the full potential of the space. And once the ceiling was removed, the space really started to reveal itself, and they were able to create a rather spacious mezzanine which housed the bedroom and the ensuite bathroom. Below the bedroom sat the kitchen, living room, and dining. And when it came to the interior design detailing, I wanted everything in the space to be kind of like an understated celebration of Sri Lankan art and craft and Sri Lankan artisans, really. And so the furniture was all made with the best teak and the best fabrics, and we had one-of-a-kind art all over the apartment. And this piece by Chamila Gamage is one of the pieces that did the heavy lifting. This piece was created by the artist. He's into fine art, but for the first time he had experimented with batik methodology. And another layer of the story was that he created this series with his family, all of them involved, over a COVID-19 lockdown. And so I think when you're sourcing items as well, it's really good to think about what energy and what stories they carry themselves, and how you can bring that into the space and add value. You enter this little apartment through a front veranda. This veranda is basically overlooking the court square and is lined with ancient banyan trees. And so I wanted to refer back to that heritage, and so I chose a checkerboard floor that in like really subtle hues that wouldn't compete with the environment. And then we kept the same front door that had always been there. When you walk into the space, it kind of has dual function, right? We wanted to make it feel like a really luxurious living room and dining room, but at the same time we needed to incorporate the kitchen. And so very simply, by choosing a materiality that extended all the way through the space, we were able to create a sliding door that either hid or revealed the kitchen. I chose brass as the backsplash for this, just to kind of create an added interest, but also for the customers, for the client to feel like they might get away with making the kitchen area kind of like a sexy little bar area instead of like a traditional pantry, and but saying that it did have all the bells and whistles of a traditional kitchen. With a small space like this, I think it's really important to be able to connect materials and have them speak to each other. And in this case, I wanted some things to traverse the entire space, and so I created this 12-foot, rather large cane pendant light that extended from the upper level all the way down to the bottom level. And this cane was, you know, the same material used in the dining room chairs, and so like they were having a bit of a dialogue. And I think those things are really important when you want continuity in tight spaces. And in spaces like this that have high function, you need to consider what they look like from all angles. And I think, and you have to also consider, more importantly, the flow of the space and how people live in it. And I think by tucking the dining room table under the staircase, we were able to ensure that there was a good freedom, you know, freedom of movement. And then in addition to that, I created these little seats that tucked in, additional seating if required, but then they tucked into the coffee table, which was again oval in shape, so that it increased that feeling of ease of navigation, because I think if you start to do you know, sharp corners in small spaces, it gets a little bit uncomfortable. So these are just tiny little ways of making the space feel comfortable and cozy and easy to be in. The same brass elements, so this is another way that you can thread a design through an entire space. So you first encounter the brass for the outdoor lights that flank the front door, and then when you come into the space, you encounter the brass on the backsplash of the kitchen, and then when you move up to the upper level, you then encounter it as these niches, which then became the bedside tables, because obviously we didn't have a large footprint and we couldn't add a lot of furniture. And so these are the ways that you can connect the space throughout. And then also when it came to creating this pendant light, I wanted to create this large piece, but of course it had to be functional. And so like, how do you clean this thing, right? So I created a series of different baskets essentially that each showcased a different traditional weave from Sri Lanka, and each of them were attached with these little clips so you could take them out and clean it entirely. And even when you were thinking about the light and how it would spread across the space, we decided to go with one long linear bulb so that you wouldn't interrupt the sight line in any way. Next project I'm going to talk about is Malkoha. Malkoha is a new space in the south, and it really is in a way a truly modern cafe, but situated in a well-loved coastal environment. The project was really all about melding the innovation of modern coffee culture with the tradition of local hospitality. The name Malkoha highlights the owner's love of nature. Malkoha is a striking bird, part of the cuckoo family, and a variety of which is endemic to Sri Lanka. As a result of this, I wanted to incorporate biophilic design throughout the space, and it was really kind of a central element to the designs we developed. Once you enter the coffee bar, once you enter the space, the bar really kind of takes center stage, and it's wrapped in rammed earth. And I think with this, what I wanted to do was kind of ground it in the space, but also have it feel rooted in nature. The slick mod bar technology kind of studs the counter, and this is the first time for this technology in Sri Lanka, and it was kind of a really nice way to create intrigue and give it that modern edge. I wanted to also ground the space with some antiques, and in this space in particular, the plants were really used as sculpture. The nature theme is prevalent, but I also wanted to be quite restrained with it, and so I built it into the lighting design. And so one of these designs I created was made out of brass, and it was to kind of subtly mimic an upside down flower and how the petals might sit. And the one next to it, we did a series of ruched linen pendants that, when they grouped together, could resemble, pods or seeds and things that birds might disperse or trees might disperse. And so these are little ways to, again, reinforce the narrative that you're trying to tell. When it came to furniture, Malkoha is completely surrounded, the space is completely surrounded by glass, and so I wanted to take that into consideration. So I chose teak and rattan, which I knew would kind of glow in, at sunset and during golden light, which is the time they close, but at the same time kind of feel really light and airy in the space during the day and not take up too much of a footprint. When you work with spaces that are covered in glass, you also have to start to consider what you see outside and how those colors might connect with the internal landscape that you've created. And so we used a lot of continuity with elements like terracotta, because there were breeze blocks outside and there was borolu used outside, and so I brought a lot of those textures and feels inside as well, so it all felt harmonious. The other thing you have to consider with glass is, once the sky and your environment starts changing outside, what is your lighting, how does it affect the lighting inside? And so that's something also that we had to consider and adjust as we went along. I want to talk now a little bit about fabrication, and fabrication to kind of almost affect behavior in places. So with Malkoha, this needed to function as many different things. It needed to function as a cafe, it needed to function as somewhere for people to work, somewhere for people to eat, somewhere for people to relax. And so we had a range of different furniture, indicating that. And so one of the places I created these chairs, sorry for the very basic drawing, but just to illustrate to you how creating something that you can't find in the market to kind of complete the story is something that I always do. And so I fabricated these chairs for kind of a moment of pause. So when people come in, maybe they don't want to be part of a bigger group, maybe they don't want to be on their laptop, and maybe they just want a place to have their coffee, read the paper, and have a moment of pause. And so that's what I was kind of thinking when we fabricated these lounge chairs. And then in the same way, kind of how do you fabricate for interaction, right? And so I created these checkerboard tables, which if you put them together, they were the coffee table in front of the sofa. But if you separated them, 4 people could have a little game. And that's kind of, these are the ways that interior designers can almost affect behavior in the spaces that they create. These next 2 pieces, I just want to illustrate how you can weave a story. And so basically, I was commissioned by a family in Colombo. They had a long history in the gem trade. In fact, this was an art that was passed down from father to son for generations and generations. And they had a store in the heart of Colombo. And as soon as they came to me, I wanted to really highlight that wealth of knowledge and not just be another retail store. So we started to consider how can we begin to educate the customers when they walk in, right? Instead of just show them a bunch of fancy jewels. And so I suggested, why don't we, and also the owner had a collection, an amazing collection of rare stones, both gemstones and crystals and semi-precious stones and all of this. And so I was thinking, what if we display it almost like museum-esque, so that they can understand where the end product comes from, understand its actual natural formations, and kind of fall in love with the magic of that. And so with that, I wanted to create a display case that, it didn't look like it came from China. And I wanted to use historical references to communicate that story. And so the design was very much centered around vintage with antique moldings. And so that also starts to kind of back up the narrative that you're trying to convey. And once the customers had been educated and seen how it comes out of the ground, we then wanted to kind of push the sale a little bit. So when it was time for them to go and sit down and discuss what their requirements was, I wanted them to sit at a desk that almost felt like a piece of jewelry, and the expert would come in and be able to discuss their requirement and show them different stones. And so I made these desks that were completely out of brass, and so it had its own glow. But then on one side I created this open cavity so they could come and place the raw materials in that and kind of hold and retain the customer's attention and kind of really make them present while they were in the shop. The next one I'll talk about is this radical little rock desk. This was for a project called Ether. This was a project that was on a mountain, essentially overlooking the ocean. And in order to create the 5 villas that I was, kind of commissioned to do, we had to do a little bit of excavation of the land. And this is something that really disturbed me. And so I wanted to bring back what we had removed in a way. And so I wanted to create and highlight the rocks that we had taken out. And so I found this one rock that I obviously have fallen in love with, and decided to build the whole reception around that. And so I created this rock desk right in the open air reception as soon as you enter the property. And this is probably the first thing that the customer would interact with. And so I wanted to speak directly to the stunning landscape that it lives in, and that's really what makes Ether unique. And so that's kind of the thinking behind that. And then I wanted to also, and it was quite a challenge to cut this wood according to the undulations of the desk, and my fabricators were very mad at me about this one. But the piece that sits behind the desk as well is a collaboration that we were able to do with Ruanga Amrasinghe, sitting right here. And she was able to really interpret my desire to showcase the natural beauty of that particular view and that particular space. And so this piece, as you engage and you go closer to it, the work is in mixed media, and so it has a lot of texture and surprises kind of embedded in it. And the more you engage with it, the more it reveals itself. And that's exactly what I wanted to emote in the visitor, and have them connect with the landscape in that way. And so that's just another way that you can really collaborate with artists across different mediums to bring your vision to life. The next thing I'm going to talk about is upcycling. This is something that I'm quite passionate about and try to include in most of my projects. This is a bar that was done for private residents, a lovely couple in Bellamula. And these are all doors and windows, and these two have a story of their own. They were upcycled not once, but twice or thrice, I think. And they are full of character, and this is a way that you can really breathe soul and personality into a space. And sometimes it's just about reimagining something's function, right? I took these green glass jars essentially and reimagining them as lights. And I think, breathing new life into all things is a beautiful way to kind of design. I find making, a more conscious decisions when it comes to choosing design detailing is a really good way to kind of promote sustainability, but also at the same time give your clients something completely unique. And that's something that's like a really winning combination. And I think that more designers should and could kind of reimagine what is once perceived as waste and then make it into this limitless creative resource. This was a little cabinet of curiosities that I made. It was made out of brass and timber. It was specifically designed for a project where I was working with a young couple who were already avid antique collectors. In fact, we decked out their entire penthouse apartment with antiques only. It was the first time I've ever been allowed to do that, and so it was a fantastic project. And at the same time, I still wanted to inject some new blood, some new vibrancy into the space. I didn't want everything to feel old. And so I was determined to custom make a few items for them. And one of these pieces was this cabinet of curiosities, because they were also gonna, they were newly pregnant or heavily pregnant actually at the time, and they didn't want their new baby to be able to break all of the valuable things that they had collected over their entire life together. And so we had this little cabinet where everything could be locked away if required. And I also thought, if I make it in brass, it's going to age beautifully, and very soon it will fit in seamlessly with the other collected items in their home. And I think that's something you have to also consider when you fabricate, is how you need to cast your mind ahead and think, how is it going to age. The same couple, because they were pregnant, part of the scope was designing a nursery, right? And I wanted to approach the nursery with a lot of sensitivity and intention. I think young moms or first-time moms, it can be quite isolating. You spend a copious amounts of time alone in a room with a baby, and it can make you feel kind of cut off from the rest of the world. And so I wanted a way to bring joy to the mundane. And so I designed this chest of drawers, which also, was a changing table. And so in order to bring joy, I got this artist to hand paint what looks like inlay, and we kind of secretly hid all of these little prayers for the baby. And I think that's something that every time the mom interacts with it, it makes her really happy, and that makes me really happy. The last thing I will talk about is antiques. I don't think I can talk about my work without talking about antiques. Everyone who knows me well knows I'm absolutely obsessed. I just want to touch on what kind of value this can bring into your space. So I think objects carry a certain biography. The personal artifacts have a tendency to hold memory, and it often carries, a timestamp of someone's lived experience. So by choosing these pieces based on stories or historical references, kind of transform what could be just an aesthetical choice into almost like a tribute to identity and to culture. The way I see it, interior designers can be a mediator for the human experience. We can interpret clients' values, their intentions, and translate it into solutions that kind of really go beyond form and function. And we have the power to foster real connections between people and places. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, what value are we adding, right, through our designs? What connections will these places foster? And at the end of the day, what impact will it leave? Thank you.